and welcome to a new episode of Bring It Up. It's me, Chiara.
And me, Sarah. Welcome back, guys, to this new episode. How are you?
So, today, on the heels of our previous episode on hate speech, we wanted to dedicate an entire episode to the concept of stereotypes, how they develop, why they exist, if and how we can fight against them. So, Sarah, I leave you the honor to present our guests.
I think the first guest we're going to introduce to our listeners is Ourania, who is our mentor here at our European Solidarity Corps project, Balkan Hotspot. So, hello, Ourania. How are you?
Hello, Sarah. I'm fine, and thank you for inviting me in this conversation.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us. So we wanted to ask you a bit more if you can do some kind of introduction about what stereotypes are and where do they come from.
It's really human, actually, the question, the topic, and the answer. Since your previous episode was around hate speech, I will start by reminding all of us that there are no divisions among offenders and victims of prejudice and discrimination. That means every human being can become, or if you want, has already become, either an offender or a victim of hate speech. And this has to do with the fact that categorizing is one of the basic needs of the human brain, the human cerebrum. The human cerebrum, which actually is the admiral, let's say, of whatever a human being is doing, is deeply connected to the ability to predict and also control the environment around us. And when I say environment, I mean both natural and emotional environment. And the reason behind that, the prediction and the controlling, is the ability of the human brain to function without stress. Therefore, categorization plays a very important role in our everyday lives. And this is why categorization is placed on the human brain on the temporal lobes, alongside with our hearing ability, our memory acquisition and recall, and also some visual perceptions. And I say this because actually, since the human cerebrum works that way, it's impossible for a human being to be stereotype-free, discrimination-free. It's impossible. When you categorize people, objects, experiences, whatever you might think, then you generalize. So you leave aside important details for a main concept. And this is how we start creating our stereotypes, of course, in a very reciprocal way with our society, our environment, our culture, our family, our political ideas, the political situations where we live. And I'm saying this because I think there is no human being that has never said, my attitude on that is, or what an attitude you have. We all around the idea of attitudes, but socio-cognitive psychology makes there a very nice distinction. Attitudes are, let's say, the central axis of human perception on social phenomena. Our attitudes dictate our behavioral outcome in interactions with other people, institutions, idea, phenomena, our interaction with the whole society, as also our personality dictates our behavior. So attitudes have three dimensions. Let's say it's a small coffee table with three legs. The cognitive leg, which is actually the stereotype, the emotional dimension, which is the prejudice, and the behavioral dimension, which is the discrimination. So a stereotype is a cognitive schema that actually generalizes our attitude, our behavior, our emotions around a category of objects, people, ideas. Every stereotype, has a real core of truth. For example, I'm a brunette myself. One of the most famous stereotypes among women is blonde women are stupid. So I'm asking myself, if I say this, have I really met all blonde women on the planet? Can I say for sure that any girl with natural or not blonde hair has minimum intelligence? Of course not. On the other hand, the core of truth is that there are some people that have blonde hair and they're not intelligent, but there is no correlation between the color of the hair and the intelligence. This is where the stereotype is starting to form. And of course, art, cinema, culture can give us examples like that, where blonde women are heavily stereotyped on their intelligence. On the other hand, there is the emotional part, prejudice. If I think that all blonde women are stupid, then probably I won't have the will, let's say, to collaborate with a blonde woman. I won't like them. This is the emotional part. And of course, I will act on my attitude, on my stereotype, and on my prejudice. So let's imagine that I want to hire a secretary, and a blonde man or a woman comes. They have all skills, but I deny them because I have this strong negative stereotype.
Anya, you're giving us a lot of food for thought. Given your explanation, there's a sentence in Italian we used to say that if you find something different from what you usually categorize, you say, this is the exception to the rule. While on the contrary, it shouldn't be considered like the exception to the rule, because you're actually contradicting yourself and you're finding new reasons for going beyond the stereotype you created, because you're acquiring new data on something that is referred to our society. I don't know if you guys and girls have ever thought about it, or what are the types of stereotypes that we can encounter as society?
I think first of all, we should introduce the other guests we have today. We have also with us Livia, Laurynas, and Filippo, who are three of our flatmates, and they wanted to intervene and participate in this discussion about stereotypes, because I feel they feel interested in this kind of topic, and they have probably a lot of personal also experiences. So guys, whenever you want, you can, of course, give us your contribution.
Okay, so I'm Laurynas, and to answer the question of what other types of stereotypes we can encounter, it could be based on gender, as discussed previously, age, nationality, sexuality, skin color. There's very many different types that we can encounter, and I would like to add maybe to the gender stereotype conversation, because I read an interesting article on in 2010, Mattel, the creator of Barbie, put out an online competition to vote what would be the next career that the Barbie would have for that year. And they had 5 choices: news anchor, architect, surgeon, environmentalist, and a computer engineer. And a lot of computer engineers that are women decided to kind of get together and try to create a competition and support for this type of Barbie to be released, because there's a very low representation of women in STEM careers in general. And in the end, that was voted as the top Barbie that would be produced, but they released the news anchor and the computer engineer because Mattel was not comfortable enough to dedicate Barbie that's relatively in a male-dominated career path. So I thought it was a very interesting sort of, almost you can say, institutional discrimination, which institutional discrimination is just societal systems that uphold disenfranchisement of minority group of people that act on an institutional level rather than individual. So it's more broad and macro level discrimination.
Yeah, Laurynas, I completely understand what you say, because another reflection that I was having yesterday while thinking about the ideas for the podcast and everything is that, for example, you were talking about a very low representation of women in engineering in general career. And it's absolutely true, because I think that every one of us who went to university, for example, can relate to the fact that there are some faculties who are more suitable, let's say, people think that are more suitable for women, and other faculties that are more suitable for men. For example, I studied foreign languages, so it's a humanistic faculty, and most of my classmates, but in general, my faculty were women. And also in psychology, education, they were all women, basically. And on the other hand, if you look, for example, at the engineering campus, they were all men. Very, very few women decided to study engineering, whichever kind of engineering. I feel like nowadays with university, faculties like economics and law can be like a little bit more mixed. There are a lot more equality, let's say, in participation of students from both genders. But yeah, for example, also in that, like why me as a woman, maybe I aspire to be an engineer, but I don't feel like 100% maybe comfortable to pursue this kind of career in my studies, because all of my classmates are men. So I'm starting to thinking maybe it's not for me, because maybe I should follow another kind of path during my university study, because women do not study engineering. There are not so many engineers women. So yeah, this is one thing that came to my mind when you were talking about the engineer Barbie.
Actually, Sarah, you are absolutely right, because, and I will link our conversation with the social representations and the theory that derives from the phenomenon, because actually all this system of attitudes that leads to stereotyping and discrimination works in an unconscious level, is extremely well rooted in the social context, is not willing to change, and social change walks in really slow and small steps, and always they are in a circular, influential interaction with the active social norms. So yes, there is this small change when it comes to genders and education, but typically even today, the patriarchal social representation of profession is active. This is why Mattel could introduce Barbie as an engineer only when they also introduced Barbie as a newscaster. And when I was a child, because I'm also really older than you, I could be your mother, Barbie's professions, and I'm proud I didn't own a Barbie, had to do with being a hairdresser, a nanny, walk dogs. The most, let's say, crazy profession was that of being able to be a pilot and a doctor. But when Barbie was a doctor, was either a doctor for animals or a doctor for children. She was never a surgeon.
You know, this comes in very handy, because we had the first episode ever recorded of our podcast is an episode where we quoted the so-called glass ceiling issue, which has a lot to do with sexism and stereotypes. So now I see that Livia has something to add to our conversation. So Livia, please.
Yes, thank you for introducing me. I think stereotypes are a problem when people reduce people to their stereotypes and don't try to find out who this person really is, and first has this lens of the stereotype to encounter the person and to find out about it, because they will see the person maybe in a different light than others. And we also have different kinds of stereotypes, right? Like maybe positive stereotypes, but also bad or negative stereotypes. And even though some stereotypes are positive, they are eventually in our head maybe they have a, like, for example, when we say, oh, women are so beautiful, this in the end can also lead to the reduce for women to their beauty. So in a way, it's not just positive, but it also has some aspect that it can be used in a different kind of way. And also, for example, when we talk about skin color, that when you have kind of positive stereotypes about Black people, for example, it can still be hurtful, because in the end it means that you have a stereotype about a person that is not in your norm, like, or you have a stereotype about, so you kind of cut them out of the society, and you say those people are like this, and that means you're making a line between you and them, and even though these people are just as part of the society as you are. And I also think, for example, with the Barbie production and everything, that stereotypes get especially dangerous when we look at, okay, how do I start this? In our world, different people have a different amount of power, especially looking at their money, at their positions in government, like positions in job, if they have huge companies that produces Barbie. And we know that, for example, in the cinema too, because we consume those things, how our world looks like from many movies and series. And when all the people, or I mean, how it was before and how it still is mainly, I think, men and white dominated, then it's about the stereotypes those people have that most of the world will see. You know, we see the world out of a specific lens, and that is making the specific type of stereotype more dangerous because they have more power over it, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. What you said makes sense about people that have, let's say, extra influence, like a director, a politician, a comedian, an artist. Then their own prejudices and their own stereotypes are easier to be followed because they have this extra status quo. And the whole idea of stereotypes has a lot to do with our personal identity. In social psychology is common knowledge that whatever we identify with that makes a we is always better than the others. So it's easier to follow stereotypes that actually empower your own identity. It's easier to follow them because you can use it as a scapegoating, as social justification, social differentiation. It's them, not us. And of course, positive discrimination that you refer to can be also too hurting, because usually we positively stereotype on groups of people that we consider weak, marginalized. So this extra positive behavior or attitude is something that hurts them because we still don't treat them with equity and on their personal skills. So what you say, all that you said makes sense to me.
So let's now introduce our third guest, because there's also another kind of stereotype that needs to be discussed. And I feel that Filippo is going to talk about it a bit with his personal experience.
Well, I could, but I changed my plans like I always do. I didn't have any plan to talk about this. Maybe we'll go a bit out of topic, but I think that the root of the issues you just discussed, like, is not based on society, but is based on not knowing ourselves as individuals. Because from an holistic approach, and maybe like many of us have never heard about this stuff, like we're like made of the same substance of the universe. This is something, for example, that for philosophy, Anaximandros and Heraclitus were the first to get this theory. But now I'm basing myself specifically on Ayurveda, which is the holy Indian medicine. And what Ayurveda says that we're like made of 5 elements that make our personality. So there are like a certain elements that corresponds to like attitudes. For example, who has a lot of air, like me, is creative. Who has fire has leadership, and so on. And I think that in this case, for example, like Sarah said, that there are many like women that don't go to this faculty, like many men that like are in charge of positions of being like entrepreneurs. That the problem is that like many times this is not only about like men and women, but in not knowing how we're made. Because I see many men that they don't have leadership, but they get to be leaders because of like money or political positions, or like something that is not connected to their own nature. And they don't understand that, for example, there are like women as well as men that have the fire element, which is leadership according to this theory. So there are like many women that have a lot of leadership that are not taken in consideration. But I think that the problem is not like the stereotype in this case, it's not knowing how we're made. Because if we knew that like people with a certain amount of this element would be good in charge of this position, we will no longer be sexist or have certain prejudice, because we would know how we are made. And this is the main problem for me. But it's not only about men and women. For example, you see also like between men that there are like men that try to be leader, but they are no leader. And men that like, try to be artists, but they are no artists. Like, it's really about knowing ourselves. For example, if I had to be a leader, my company would go into bankrupt in 2 days because I am no leader, absolutely. But everyone has a nature and needs to respect it. So this is my point. I didn't have any plan to discuss it, but I thought it was good. And if you want, like going ahead, I can also introduce my other topic, which is about like regionality and borders.
Yeah, Filippo, for sure we're going to talk about it, but I wanted to comment first on what you were saying, because you were talking about, for example, leadership. Like both women and men have can have the leadership, let's say, skill, of course. But the problem, I think, is that is where that leadership is going to be applied. For example, if you think about women, you think about family in general, because they are the caretakers, let's say, in families. So I'm thinking, because I have these stereotypes in my mind, of course, I'm thinking about leadership for women more into the family context. So, for example, women, moms, are the ones who are probably more in charge of the education of their children, of taking care of their children, and that's the kind of leadership in my stereotyped mind, I see women in charge of, and like developing more. Instead, I see men, the leadership of men, for example, more applied to business, to the work context. And it's a pity, because of course women can be 100% businesswomen, can be leaders of great companies and great enterprises, can do whichever thing a man does, for example. And also in the other way around, I feel like, for example, that the figure, the role of fathers is underestimated, because it's women who are the ones who take care of the children, and fathers, most of the times, they don't have the chance to participate more, because they are seen as the one who has to go to work and bring the money home, and not caring that much about the family, because it's going to be the man, the wife, or the partner, or whatever, the one in charge of taking care of the children. So yeah, of course, it's leadership for both of them, but applied into very different contexts. I don't know, Ourania, if you want to say something about it.
Thank you, because actually, yes, I do. First of all, I would like to comment on what Filippo said. And he referred to the ancient Greek philosophers. I will refer to Carl Sagan, who said, yes, that we are all made by stardust, and that makes us equal. And I love Filippo's approach on how we should learn ourselves. And yes, because if I tackle my personal stereotypes and I diminish them, because I cannot destroy them as more as I can, then I will produce a different behavior, I will raise different awareness, I will be a different example. But culture and the norms go really beyond our personal spectrum of life. For example, what you, Sarah, said about mothers and fathers. Maternity, whether we like it or not, is the archetype of femininity. And an archetype is a very strong stereotype. It's a core of a social representation. And the social representation, it's like having a shared stereotype. The stereotype is mine. The social representation is the stereotype of a whole society, a whole civilization. So, for example, as you said, we know, we have historical data about women that they were leaders in different factors of life. And I will give a very small example of that. Everyone knows Alexander the Great. It doesn't matter if you like him or not. It doesn't matter how you criticize on what he did. The truth is that Alexander the Great was the artwork of a woman, his mother. Okay, she was a queen and a princess, but she was an exception because she received male education when she was a child. She knew military strategy, she knew politics. And that was an example that breaks, let's say, the social representation of women that hasn't changed a lot during not the decades, but the centuries. A woman should, as Livia said, be beautiful. As Sarah said, be a caregiver, be silent, be domestic, not be a leader, unless it's family issues. Because the socio-cognitive system of the representation of a woman is that a woman is there to bear children and take care of the family. Her world is the house, while the male's world is outside of the house. And that is completely unfair for both of them. It's completely unfair for a father not to be taken for granted when it comes to the methodologies and the ideals that you will teach to your family and your children. The social representation of the father is the money bringer. Money will produce the safety of the family. And this has to do with our culture. This is why it's so difficult to change a stereotype or a social representation, because it actually works in the unconscious, dictating what we consider to be reality or not. It's not, I was told by a woman, a Roma woman, wanted to participate in a social experimental research around the war in the Balkans that destroyed Yugoslavia. And she said, I would really like to come to the conversations, but I won't. Why? I asked her. Because when the war was actually unfolding and we were just watching the news, I tried commenting. And my father told me in a very polite way, in a very natural way, war is the business of men. A woman has nothing to do even with commending a war. Not as a way of bringing her to her position, because this is what the family thinks it's natural for a girl. Don't even speak about a war you see unfolding in front of your eyes. This has to do with social representations. And this is why we have to fight inside ourselves first, as all of you have said, in order to produce a change as thick as one hair, one only, one piece of hair.
I would like to answer to that, or not answer, but comment on that too. It was a nice talk, Rania. Because, okay, maybe the last thing you said, or just maybe it's also something more general, that we have those stereotypes in our heads and they get created in our heads, and then we think about people, maybe even about ourselves and those stereotypes. But then it's always input and output. Like when we have those stereotypes in our mind and know how it is, then maybe we will even act like them because that's what we know and how we do it. And then somebody else picks it up again. And that's how we influence each other the whole time again. And it maybe doesn't change that much. And I wanted to say some things to Filippo and Sarah actually too. Just have to remember a little bit. I think, Filippo, you said the thing with the leadership and the women and men. And I believe it's also a problem if the stereotype starts limiting you and limits the way you think about other people and about yourself. That you say women can't be leaders, and therefore you close yourself up. You know, you don't even, it's easier for humans to categorize, but in the end, what does come out of it? If you really open your eyes and look at every person, then you will find out that they are way more than your stereotypes. But of course, it takes more time and more patience. But in the end, it's more like, I think it will bring you what you really need when you look openly on these things. And also to Sarah, that was with the woman that is being the leader in the house and in the family. Yeah, I think that's like, I mean, that's the environment where she's allowed to be the leader, so the man can chill and like have their own little person that does everything for him. I don't know. And I think it's a really interesting thing also how much stereotypes then are connected to identity sometimes, because people have stereotypes about us being a woman or something, and then maybe we even want to fulfill them. Maybe it's better calling it expectations or something. And if we don't fulfill them, for example, I'm German, and a stereotype from Germans is that they're always pretty punctual and whatever. And I'm a person that is very unpunctual. And if I don't fulfill the stereotype in other countries, sometimes I feel like, am I even German? Like, is this real, you know? And I also remember that, about my sexuality, for example, I can fall in love with anyone. Like, I don't really care about gender, I think. But before, when I was younger, there were so many negative stereotypes about homosexual people that I couldn't get it in my mind that I could be part of this. I was like, but I mean, I feel love and affection for this person, but I'm not that stereotype, you know, I don't want to be part of this. And that also influences your own identity and can confuse you, you know, when you know this is the type, how the society sees you, but then you feel like, okay, I'm kind of part of this, but also I don't want to fulfill that stereotype. And you have to see more representation and diversity to even be able to open up yourself to those things. You know?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Livia, because also I think as we grow up, our culture and the environment we grow up in teaches us to behave in a certain way, following those stereotypes. And what you were talking about before, there is actually, I think from the psychological point of view, there is like a specific term referring to the stereotype threat, which is the fear of doing something or not doing something that would confirm the stereotype, the perception, let's say, of the stereotype. So for example, you said, I'm German, and all people in Germany are perceived as very punctual people. So if I'm not punctual, I'm not a good German, basically, but it's in that case, being punctual can be seen as a good stereotype. Like people from Germany are well organized, they can do the job perfectly. And you feel this fear of, oh my God, if I don't show myself as a punctual person, what is going to happen? I mean, I'm not representing Germans in a good way, but because being punctual can be seen as a positive stereotype. So it's very funny, let's say, to realize how vicious this circle is, how like whichever group you're part of, knowing that stereotype gets anxiety because he or she knows that she has or he has to be, how can I say, like to be able to reach that stereotype if the stereotype is good, or to act in a way that will confirm the negative stereotype. So it's very, very difficult to get out of this circle, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. The things you say provide me a huge assist because first of everything, there's this thing that I guess Livia quoted before, the positive stereotype. Well, actually, when I was making a research and I was looking for information about this topic, then I tried to find something good. I wanted to see if there's something good about stereotypes, which is actually a question I wanted to ask you. But so I Google positive aspects of stereotypes, and the only thing I could encounter were positive stereotypes as opposite of negative stereotypes. And about this topic, I had an amazing conversation with Ourania. Some of you may know her for another interview we had live on Instagram to raise awareness of violence against women. And she was telling me that it's very important for the Roma community to develop some sort of positive storytelling, because it's totally related to what you said, Sarah, about the fact that you feel part of a community, so you have somehow to stick to the stereotype. At the same time, when you're part of a community that is represented in a negative way, then you feel this as some sort of huge not only boundaries, but also like weights on your shoulders. And so is this the reason she explained me of the huge amount of young Roma students that drop out of school because they do not feel that they can match with the idea of being good students. And so in this case, as Rania was saying at the beginning, that's why I'm sorry, Rania, if I interrupted you, but I wanted us to develop all of those ideas and later come back to them. It's also the idea of using art, not only like to see art, not only like the tool that can create those stereotypes and make them last long, like when you develop a cliche, for instance, in theater, in literature, in cinema, and so on, but also as the tool that can help you get rid of stereotypes. And in this case, this is what Ourania is doing, creating positive storytelling for Roma students, for instance. I don't know if you want to add some comments on this, please feel free to do so.
You were saying if you are part of a group that has more negative stereotypes, negative stereotype connotation, even though I think we can also discuss it, that there are even positive stereotypes or stereotypes in general. And I just wanted to say that it's also when you have a negative stereotype in maybe a group or something. Okay, for example, a woman in our school, the last year I was in school, we had a woman as the director of school. And sometimes, I don't know if you felt that too, but that women who are in high positions, sometimes they're harder than men. Like they are even more like bam, bam, bam. And I feel that's also a way maybe to fight against the stereotype. They had to fight their whole way up there because they're seen as, oh, you're a woman, probably you're more emotional, probably you can't do this. So they even, they have to double their force to show, no, I can do this. And therefore maybe it sometimes seems as harsher because they have to fight with then when a man is easily a director and then like, he can go maybe more easy on things. Just to point out that some people really then go the other way and have to show double that they do not want to be associated with that stereotype. Yes, Ourania.
Thank you, Livia. Actually, what I will go from Livia to Chiara and Sara the other way. People tend to overact when they have to face a stereotype against them. So with referring to whatever we said about women and leadership, for example, if you are a female leader, then usually you overact your leadership. You're more strict because people actually, according to their stereotypes and social representations, think that a woman as a leader is soft, undecisive, not able to lead. So they overact it in order to gain this extra respect they are missing because of their representation. On the other hand, I will go now to what Chiara said about positive stereotyping or representing, and what Yoria was saying. It's true. When you have, since stereotyping is also closely linked to our social identity, when you have a community that is heavily and only negatively stereotyped, like the gypsy communities, then the way to tackle those negative feelings is to create positive images, positive representations. You cannot create a stereotype, but you can start setting more light on the positive aspects of an identity that are hidden, like the Roma community. This is why Georgia is writing stories about educational success, or sharing the story about a partisan gypsy fighter in the Second World War in Greece. Because normally the children will hear that if you're gypsy, you will end up a thief, a drug dealer. If you're a girl, you will get married around the age of 14, maximum 16, and be just a household wife and a mother. So we create this positive representation in order to empower an identity and actually support them find their own balance, because they also bear lots of negative stereotypes against Gazette, non-Roma communities and people. And this has to do also, to go back to what Sara was saying, because actually stereotyping and social representations have to do with a norm. Norm means rule, but normality means naturality or not. So when we were speaking about the homosexual stereotyping, when I was a child, the common slang word on the streets about LGBTQI plus people were the abnormal. But abnormal doesn't mean out of nature. It means out of the rule. So I think we should keep that in ourselves, that normality has nothing to do with the rule. It has to do with nature. And we just, in a very bad way, civilization and the Western way of culture has done this thing between naturality and normality. There is no person that can be called abnormal. There are lots of persons that live outside of a rule. And stereotyping, fighting a stereotype, has to do with personalization. So when I am given a stereotype, for example, I'm turning 44, I'm unmarried, and I'm not a mother. This is negative prejudice against me. I should have had at least 2 weddings. I should have had at least 2 children by now, because I'm out of the norm. But this doesn't make me an abnormal woman. So if I tend to personalize myself to get rid of the burden that a negative stereotype is giving on me, then I should think twice about how I use stereotypes, about my personal social representations that can be negative or positive. Because what Livia said, German people are supposed to be punctual, and I'm not. And this puts an extra pressure on Livia not to live the way she is, an unpunctual person, but to force herself to be a punctual person in order to be able to fulfill the German identity according to the European stereotypes. This hurts her as a person. And of course, it hurts a nation if you refer to Germans only with the punctuality.
I would like to add to you and to Livia when she said prior about sexuality and self-internalized homophobia, for example, is very real, and I've experienced it myself. And it's, as Livia said, it's like you have this idea of gay people, for example, that you're brought up in as you're growing up, and you can feel like you're one of them, but you don't want to be associated with what you heard, what you see, or what you experience, because it seems so wrong, and it's just feels like you are not that person that is represented, although you technically feel like you are. And there's a lot of, like, it's so ingrained in gay people, I think, that we let it slip even between ourselves, kind of. I don't really know how to put it into words, but even with the people I've dated or talked with, they excuse their own behaviors that could be constituted as homophobic, even though they themselves are gay. And it's, as we were talking, like, it's kind of like reflecting on yourself and seeing what you can do to change and overcome those same barriers and stereotypes that you have against a group of people that you yourself are part of. It's the same as, like, you know, as being German and being punctual. It's like, well, you know, now I feel like, okay, I'm gay and I have to act a certain way to not offend someone or to do something that would bring a bad spotlight on gay people. It's that sort of self-monitoring in some ways that is another kind of like layer if you go deeper.
The strength and the power of the elements that we're discussing is immense. And I would like to refer to some researches or social experiments in order to underline that. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the survey of Solomon Asch. I don't know if you know that. Well, the story goes like this. Imagine a blackboard where someone has drawn three vertical lines, A, B, C. It's absolutely obvious that one of them is unequal to the others. And you have the subjects of the survey, and you ask them to tell you which is the unequal line. It sounds very simple. It's not, because if you play with the other people that will speak before or after the actual subject, then you will see that many people will give you the answer of the majority that they heard than what they see with their own eyes. And if you ask them and you show them that it's definite that, for example, line number C is shorter than the other two, they will find excuses. They will say, today I have a headache, or I forgot my glasses, or the light in the room. Because actually, social representations and stereotypes like majority brings the truth, where minority doesn't bring the truth in the table, is a social representation. And it can affect my perception, my visual perception. And I will just give another short example. If I could share my screen with you, you could also see a sketch. Otherwise, I can give it to you later. There is a socio-cognitive phenomenon called perceptual distortion. It has to do with the amazing work of Allport and Postman back in 1945 in the US. So they conducted research when they were giving sketches to their subjects. People had to look over the images, then you take the images away and you ask people to describe what they saw. One of the most famous slides that they projected to their subject was the scene in an American metro or trolley, doesn't matter, mass transportation, where you see people sitting and standing, and in the middle you have a couple of males, a black male wearing a very nice professional suit, and a white male wearing a working jumpsuit, and they are in the middle of the picture arguing. The black person is in a defensive way, even body movement. And he has one hand open, palm on the air, asking why with the other hand, while the white person holds the right hand with the index finger open, attacking. And the small detail is that the white person holds an open knife close to his belly. When Allport and Postman asked people to say what they saw, most of them said that they saw a male couple arguing when the black person was attacking the white. And they didn't even see the open Swiss knife on the white person's hand. Even today, when I show this sketch to people and I ask them to describe it, most of them fail to see the knife. Because in our active social representation, white people are always better than the rest. And if you go way back in the time when Allport and Postman were doing the research, you go back to the movie of the Green Book. And I advise our listeners to see the movie and maybe even search for the researches I'm referring to. Because usually people, and in Greece we say, I need to see it with my own eyes to believe it. No. I need to see it with my representational social eyes in my brain to believe it. Because my eyes see a black person with a professional suit defending himself against a working class white male with a knife. But my brain understands the other thing, that the black person is wearing the working clothes and is attacking the white male. Because this was the social representation around black people back then. Even today, we see that happening, especially we saw it in the US. We see it here in Greece with Roma people, with refugees. Because we is always better than them. Because our perception can be altered by the things that our society believes, not even personally ourselves. And this is scary, if you think about it. And my final comment on that, it will be link whatever we are discussing with the Holocaust and the bystanders effect. People that were watching what's happening and they understood something different because of the Nuremberg laws, because of the propaganda, because of the pseudoscience. They were seeing something different than what their cerebrum was receiving as stimuli. So the response was in parallel with what they thought and not what they were actually receiving through their eyes, ears, etc.
Thank you, Ourania. I will ask you to share with us this picture you mentioned, this sketch, so that we can also add it in the description of the episode and everybody can see it. Meanwhile, he's listening to your description of it.
And I think now our listeners have a lot of things to reflect on. But I wanted to conclude this episode referring to the cultural stereotypes that we have. Because I feel like we mainly talked about gender-based stereotypes, but all of us, I'm 100% sure that all of us are both victims or perpetrators of cultural stereotypes related to our nationalities. So, in order to also keep it a little more light, the conversation, I wanted to conclude the episode asking you one question. So, for you, which is the stereotype that represents your country the most, and why you don't feel linked at all to that stereotype? For example, Livia was saying that Germans are very punctual, and she's not, absolutely not. So I wanted you to find stereotypes from your country, and the reason why that stereotypes should not exist, because it's not like that, because it doesn't take into consideration your unique personal characteristics. So if you want, I can go first, because the other day I was talking to a Greek friend, and he told me, well, about Italians, I think that everybody have in mind the fact that Italians are all very fashionable and elegant. You dress up in a really, really nice way. And I was like, really? I'm always in sweatpants and jeggings and leggings and sweatshirts. I am the least fashionable person in Italy, probably. So that's why, for example, I was reflecting about stereotypes about Italian, which can be this one. And what about you and your countries?
Okay, I can go with two. One external, Greeks are lazy. All of you have heard that during the 10-year crisis. Greeks and the people of the south are lazy and they just want money from the north in order to have parties. There are lazy Greeks, there are hardworking Greeks, as it happens to all nations. As on the other part, the counterpart, Greeks think themselves, I'm excluding myself, as extra special because they're Greeks. This is also not true. Every person can be special with no matter or links to the nationality, but Greeks have this idea that they are super special when it comes to the rest. And you will see sometimes people, Greeks, answering to the question, where do you come from? And they will uplift their shoulders. They will make their body taller, and they will have a huge Colgate advertisement smile saying, I'm Greek, as if that means something. But yes, Italians are supposed to be the fashionable ones because of Milan.
Yes, but we're not, actually, at least me. Livia, you want to go next?
Yes, besides the punctual, maybe, every time I go to another country and somebody tries to, how do you say that in English? Like, to speak German, they're like, and I'm always like, yeah, that's my language. That's how we talk all the time, you know? I get it, and I think it might also come from the world wars and stuff, and that people see movies, and that people, when it's about war, talk like that, like and also the language doesn't sound as smooth as some other languages, but still, many times when people hear me talking German, then they're like, what? That is German? Like, wow, that's so much softer than I thought, or that sounds so different. And I'm like, yeah, we can also, like, we're not fighting all the time. I don't know. Yeah, that was the one I was thinking about.
Like for me, it comes from Italy. I mean, Italy is really different. It comes from regionality, that I'm from northwest Italy, that it's Veneto, and Veneto are really punctual money maker, and I am no punctual, no money maker. I'm really messy. But I wanted to say that I think, as I said before, and I didn't conclude, that the root of discriminations of stereotypes is not linked to societies or borders or so on, but it's linked to the origins of us and of the whole earth and universe. And this is it for me. Thank you.
And I'll add with a stereotype from Lithuania. I mean, a lot of people don't even know where Lithuania is, or there's not that many stereotypes about us, but one thing that Lithuanians tend to do is, and I guess I'm stereotyping against Lithuanians myself here, but they're very closed off and not quick to open up and keep to themselves, kind of, you know, and I am, I think, the complete opposite. Like, I'll enter a room and I'll start a conversation with anyone. I'll tell you all my life story if you ask me. I feel like I'm an open book, and I do not really relate to this stereotype, I guess.
And finally, one last stereotype about Italy, which in my opinion has many. And it's about Italians being good cooks. I am not at all. And every time there's someone that is not from Italy but knows the fact that I am Italian, always approaches me saying, how can I cook this pasta? Or how do you do that in the kitchen and that? And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry because I cannot help you and probably I can learn from you. But definitely if you ask me something about kitchen or how to cook something, then it's an advice you should not follow. So with this, we want to thank you very much, dear guests, and also our listeners to join us in this interesting conversation about stereotypes. I feel that we touched a lot of interesting points regarding this topic. If there's something else, we will definitely add it in another episode in other ways, so stay tuned.
Yes, exactly. So thank you again, everybody, for participating in this episode. And well, as we always say, see you next time.
Bye.